On behalf of Mr. Ismail Shaye, the CEO of the Water Sector Trust Fund, I am Ruth Nganga, the Manager for Partnership Development and Resource Mobilization. The CEO has not been feeling well for the last 1 week, and I am holding brief. So I am going to be holding brief, and therefore I will also moderate the session where he was supposed to moderate. Later, Mr. Wario will moderate, and I will also be doing the Water Sector Trust Fund presentation. So in our program, we are now in welcome and introductions. So I want to welcome all our presenters. I want to welcome our chief guest, whom I will hand over to Engineer Chengo when he joins us to introduce when he will be doing his speech. And I also want to welcome our participants, wherever we might be. I know a lot of us are in our institutions, others are out there in the general public, and others are even outside the country. We appreciate that you have taken the time to join us this morning as part of this webinar. So I can very quickly just let you know who is in the panel for this webinar. So we'll be having with us, starting us off in the program, the presentation by Mr. Michael Mangeli, who is the chairman WASPA, and also the managing director Mavoko Water and Sanitation Company. Then we'll be having Engineer Robert Gakubia, CEO WASREB, who has not yet joined us, and he'll be joining us shortly when he's done with another meeting. And we shall have Mr. Ismail Shaye. I will actually be presenting on behalf of Mr. Ismail Shaye, who is the CEO Water Sector Trust Fund. Now for the development partners, we have Elizabeth Mattioli, team leader for the Green Growth and Employment Program at the Royal Danish Embassy. Then we shall be having Anna Tufesson, the Senior Program Manager, Environment and Climate Change, Embassy of Sweden. For the Council of Governors, we have Engineer Festus Ngeno, the Chairman for the Caucus of CECs on Water, Forestry and Mining. And at the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation, Engineer Kimandi Chengo will stand in for Engineer Samuel Alima, and he will give the presentation on the role of national government in creating enabling environment. And Engineer Chengo, when he joins us, he will introduce our chief guest, and our chief guest will make the keynote speech. Then we shall move on to the non-governmental organizations, with the Kenya Markets Trust giving us the presentation through Mr. Wario Bonaya, the water lead at the Kenya Markets Trust. Then the the group commercial officer, Mr. Polycarp Imadi, the chief commercial officer from Equity Bank, will give us a presentation on behalf of the financing institutions. And finally, Dr. Mas Wawero from Davis and Shatcliffe will give us a presentation on behalf of suppliers. In the end, we shall have a plenary discussion where our participants who are not in the panel can send in their questions. Whatever question arises during the presentations, please just type it, send it in, and during the plenary, the panelists and presenters will address the question. If you can mention in your question whom you're directing it to, that will also help to focus the discussions. Thank you. So I hope we are still together. And at this point, allow me to ask Mr. Michael Mangeli to come in and give us the presentation on behalf of WASPA. You're welcome, Mr. Mangeli.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Good morning once again.
Good morning.
Now, I'll be taking you through what we prepared under WASPA, what we at least want to share with the rest of us. And as I can see it's on the screen. Now we'll go to page 2. I'll start with the background of WASPA. WASPA was established and registered in November 2002 under the Societies Act of 108. And The reason why it was registered, at least we came together based on the laws of Kenya, as the premier umbrella board for water service providers in the Republic of Kenya. Water service providers consist of water service companies which were created through enactment of the Water Act 2002 and registered under the Companies Act 486 of the laws of Kenya. These laws have now been replaced by the Water Act 2016 and the Companies Act 2015 respectively. The companies took over the provision of water and sewerage services, which had previously been carried out by the respective municipal councils, that is the defunct municipalities. The main mission of the forming WASPA was and is to facilitate an environment for our members. We are currently 70 number out of 82 who are members of WASPA, and our aim is to offer water and sanitation services effectively, efficiently, and sustainable within the framework of the national goals of the Agenda 2030 through various programs that include advocacy, benchmarking, networking, partnerships, and promotion of the best practices. I'll talk about the facts about the water service providers in Kenya. We are 88 in number, the one regulated by the regulator. The population service area, we are serving 23.4 million. Population served is 13.8. Total connectivity, the number of customers that have been connected is over 2 million. Total production, what you produce on a daily basis is 452,246,000 cubic meters. Overall, the turnover all over the country for all the water service providers is 21 billion. Production per capita is 90. And consumption per capita is 32. We have an animal called non-revenue water, which is 43%, which we are working to make sure we reduce it down to acceptable levels. Staff is 11,500, and the towns that we serve in the whole country, they are 112. Now, turnaround strategies. Financial background. Turnaround strategy means making the company profitable and again, to convert loss-making units to profitable ones. We have some of water companies that are making loss. Now, our aim is to make sure at least they turn around to start making profit or either break even. Basically, to improve decline in sales and revenue market share and profit due to internal and external factors. For water service providers, it is paradoxical. The sales are increasing at the domestic level, but revenue is declining, caused by the government decrees to contain COVID-19. The government decrees were one, the moratorium and disconnection customers with the standing water and sewage bills. I believe members are aware that we were told during this period of COVID, we were not to disconnect the customers, and that directive we yet and there to it as water service providers. Provision of free water to vulnerable and specifically those in the form of settlements. All the water service providers in the country will be providing water free of charge to all the people who live in informal areas. Mostly we are using water boozers to do that. It's service to say government agrees are the major external factors causing the water service providers to make losses, hence becoming unsuccessful. This is a result of because most of the customers are not paying. And this is a bearing on the cash flow that is coming to the institutions. That's the reason now most of the water utilities are not able to meet the operations. So ideally there's need for turnaround strategy, and one of them is liquidity problems due to reduced cash flows. Again, this is a result of the government directive. Increasing costs, we are incurring a lot of costs tracking these water, using water boozers for the informal settlements areas. Another thing is about mismanagement. And the last one is declining performance measures. So for turnaround strategies for water service providers, one of them is about retrenchment. The retrenchment strategy for the turnaround management describes wide-ranging short-term actions to reduce financial losses, whether to stabilize the company and to work against problems that cause the poor performance. For water service providers, recruitment of staff has been frozen and downsizing of staff through layoffs of catchers and returns. We had to do that because most of the utilities, all the cashiers, we have to lay them more complete so that at least the little cash flow at least we are getting can maintain and sustain the utility during this period of COVID. And focus for harmonization and abolishment of certain taxes and levies that are cost drivers of high cost of water. As we are aware, we have several taxes at least that are being levied on the utilities, and this is making water become also a little bit high as much as we are regulated by the regulator, by the tariff that they set for each water service provider. And focus for a preferential electricity tariff for water service providers to reduce operational costs. This is one of the things at least we are championing for, because the electricity that at least we are being charged as water service providers, it's like another industry. And we are pleading for the government to help us so that we can have a special tariff that will be made payable for the water service providers, so that at least we can make water not cheap as much as possible for the end users who are our customers. Increasing the customer base through last mile connectivity is one of the activities that at least we are undertaking as water service providers of the country. And we've been, over the last 1 year, we've seen a lot of increase of the customer base, and is increasing on a daily basis. And this is one of the things that we are doing on a daily basis. Number 2 is about repositioning. The repositioning strategy, also known as the entrepreneurial strategy, attempts to generate revenue with new innovations such as prepaid meters and change of product portfolio and market position. We've seen with Kenya Power, they have come now with their own prepaid meters whereby and the customer pays in advance for what at least we to consume. This is one of the strategies of what we want to bring into the water sector, whereby customers also pay for their meter, for the water in advance, like the way Kenya Power is doing. So this is one of the ways we want to explore as water service providers. And we are at a stage where we want to do some pilots within the country. We've seen some partners who are willing to come and give us these prepaid meters. This includes development of a new product such as biogas in Moranga. And we've seen some of the institutions who have gone beyond the normal provision of water and sewer services, and they have taken advantage of the waste, that is the sanitation site, and they are able to produce biogas. An example is Moranga and Briquities in Nakuru, who are exploring alternative sources of revenue, including liquidity support, subsidy, and grant for government on provision of free water. Number 3, we are talking about the renewal. With the renewal of Kanban pursues long-term actions, which are supposed to end in a successful managerial performance. The first step here to analyze the existing structures within the organization. This examination may end with the closure of some of the divisions on development of new markets or projects or an expansion in other business areas. A renewal may also lead to consequences within a company, like a removal of efficient routines or resources. On the other hand, innovative core competencies implemented, which include increased knowledge and subsidization of the company value. So basically what we are trying to say is within the water service providers and within the organization structure of each water service utility, we want to see whether there are some departments that can be merged and whether that merger will bring efficiency, so long as it do not end up affecting the service provision to our customers. And that's one way we also encourage our members to do that. For water service providers, renewal would involve rethinking on the mode of water service provision in the informal. Number 4 is the replacement. Replacement is a strategy where top managers or the chief executive officer are replaced by new ones. This turnaround strategy is used because it is theorized that new managers bring recovery and a strategic change as a result of their different experience and backgrounds from their previous work. These are structures that can be absorbed by also water service providers, whereby they bring new managers who bring new ideas. And also chances are the new managers, what they will be earning compared to the existing one, just like can be lower. And by doing that also will also reduce the cost of salaries in an institution. In conclusion, for these strategies to be effectuated, the water service providers need goodwill of both levels of the government and the entire water sector stakeholders. Government policies and legislation should be able to provide an enabling environment for the effective and efficient functioning of water service providers, including equitable and sustainable infrastructure investments. So that's at least what we prepared from my end from my water service providers.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman WASPA, Dr. MD Mangeli. We appreciate that you have given us a very good presentation on what the experience of the utilities and what they are doing in the short term and also for the long term in re-strategizing. And thank you also for sticking to the time. So please, audience, if you have questions for MD Mangeli, please send them. We shall address them later during the plenary. Now, the next presenter is supposed to be Engineer Gakubia, but I am seeing like he has not yet joined us. Engineer Gakubia, are you with us? Okay, so in the interest of time, our chief guest, if it's okay with you, I will give the presentation for the Water Sector Trust Fund. And when Engineer Gakubia comes, then he can give the presentation for WASREB.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you so much. So I am going to discuss the issues of financing for water and sanitation during the new normal. Now, the new normal, as we know it, is this global pandemic that has affected us in many ways, as you have heard from the Chairman WASPA, the adjustments that have to be made so that there is enough water and sanitation, both in the short term and also in the long term, and the financing that is required so that we can recover from this pandemic in the sector. So we can move to the next. So I will talk about the mandate that the trust fund has so that we are able to talk about the financing. Then we'll talk about the financing that has been done or that should be done in the short term. Then the sustainable financing post-COVID, and this is where we'll discuss recovery issues. Then we'll see how the challenges can be addressed and what challenges have arisen and how they can be addressed, and what the WSTF has done in the short term and what it is planning to do going forward in response to this pandemic. So the fund, in a nutshell, is mandated to assist in financing water and sanitation provision for both rural and urban. And if I can just qualify and say underserved and marginalized areas take priority. And then we are also supposed to be financing water resources management, climate change, and disaster management programs. Now, for us to have enough water provision, we need to have adequate and quality water resources. Climate change affects water, and disaster management programs will make especially a lot of sense now when we are going through this pandemic. But this could also involve floods and other disasters like drought. We are also supposed to finance sector-related research, which again is a good measure in the long term in making sure that we are prepared with the right technology for issues like what we are facing now. Thank you. So financing during COVID-19, and this is drawn out of the experiences of the Water Sector Trust Fund and also the partnerships that we are working with and what also is being done in other areas, both public and private. So where we can get funding and where we have gotten funding to address short-term issues of the pandemic is budget reallocations. So we have many programs that have been ongoing, normal development programs. But when COVID came and the government directed on the measures to be adapted to deal with the pandemic, even our ministry gave measures to be adapted, you realize there were things that were not going to be done through the budgets that we had, because, for example, issues of social distancing, curtailing of travel, reducing of travel, and therefore a lot of reallocations needed to be done. Meetings could not take place, and these ones had been budgeted for. So just by reallocating our budgets, we are able to get funding that we can put to COVID emergency issues. And this has been done with many partners, I am sure, across the country. But in our case, especially with the governments of Sweden and Danida and Finland, reallocations have released funding towards the emergency COVID, and we have been able to address issues in certain counties in this country. Contingency funds, the budgets have got contingencies in certain programs, and I am sure even our institutions, some of them have got contingency funds. When we are faced with a disaster like this, then it is time to dig into our contingency so that we can apply them for impact to make sure that our citizens are well taken care of at a time like this. So in the Water Sector Trust Fund, through one of the programs funded by the government of Kenya and also the European Union, we have been able to utilize the contingency funds to help at least 4 counties in this country during the pandemic. Additional funding, both from the government and also development partners, and I am sure that even the private sector has been involved in providing funding as the government had established the fund to address this pandemic. Many stakeholders came together to give funding towards this. So for the Water Sector Trust Fund, we have been able to get additional funding from the government of Denmark, and this has been directed for pandemic response in Nairobi County specifically. As we all know, Nairobi is facing the biggest number of COVID-19 cases. So we are doing what we can to reduce that in terms of water and sanitation provision. Disaster management funds, where disaster management funds have been set aside, they can be utilized in the short term. And where they have not been set aside, then it is time to think about how we should have disaster management funds for in case such a pandemic arises. Corporate social responsibility budgets are useful in the short term, and most of the times this will come from the private sector, from foundations, and even our public institutions. We have corporate social responsibility budgets, and it is important that they be utilized at a time like this to make sure that everyone has got what they require in response to COVID. And then savings realized from cost cutting. This would go together with the budget reallocations. There are a lot of activities we have not been able to undertake, and the chairman of WASPA mentioned also the things that are being done at the utilities to reduce the costs of activities. And these savings should be redirected to address the pandemic and to make sure that all Kenyans have got what they need in terms of water, sanitation, and the personal protective equipment. So sustainable financing for recovery and post-COVID. Now here we need to look beyond the emergency period and look at what can be sustainably done, not only to recover, but if possible, to make sure that if something like this happens again in the future, we are prepared. And the first measure we need to take is to not only continue, but also increase our development programs. The best way to address any disaster or pandemic is to have the infrastructure and the technology in place in the first place, when these issues arise. So then we will continue to focus on development programs and hopefully to cover Kenya with water and sanitation in keeping with our 2030 goal, so that when this disaster arises, then we don't see our water companies having to do a lot of work trying to make sure that water is reaching people who before have not been reached. If we could have at least most of our citizens covered with water and sanitation, then it reduces the emergency response when that time comes. Sustainable financing models would include, for example, co-funding. Why co-funding is useful for sustainability? It is because we are able to extend the little budgets we have. For instance, if the national government is doing a program somewhere, then the counties involved in the area can also come in and co-finance, and then we can expand or increase the size or the impact of that project. This is something that the Water Sector Trust Fund has been doing through our projects, where we are doing projects on the ground. We work with the counties to co-finance the same programs, and therefore we are able to basically refocus our budgets and increase the size of the project and also the impact of the projects. Leveraged funding. Leveraged funding mostly has to do with, there are some institutions which may not be able, for example, to give funding directly to government institutions like ourselves, but they can leverage on our funding and we can leverage on their funding. An example is the resort-based financing program that the Water Sector Trust Fund is doing for utilities through funding from the government of Sweden and through the World Bank. So in this program, the water companies are able to go to a bank and get a loan on prior agreed indicators with the Water Sector Trust Fund. And once they receive the milestones, once they achieve the milestones, we are able to give them a subsidy of between 50 and 60%. Now, if the Water Sector Trust Fund was not giving this subsidy, most likely the banks would not be lending to the utilities. But because of this facility, the banks are willing and incentivized to lend to the utilities. Now, this is leveraged funding because it would not come to the sector any other way. So we want to have a lot of collaboration like that, both with our financial institutions and other private sector institutions, to make sure that we can bring in as much funding to the sector as possible, and therefore be prepared both for development programs and also in case of disasters and pandemics. Now, access to affordable credit, very closely related to the subsidies, is where our utilities are able to just access affordable credit. And maybe not just the utilities, but also other organizations like the waterworks development agencies, who are very involved also in implementing cross-border water projects, water and sanitation projects. So the credit can be made affordable through blending public and private finance. If you put in government funding and the commercial institutions put in commercial financing, we can bring down the interest on lending, both to the utilities and also to our other institutions. Sound business models, 1 minute. Sound business models is something that was alluded to by the chairman WASPA when he said that they're trying to relook at their strategies and they're trying to basically have a renewed way of doing things. So if we have a more efficient revenue collection system, and I know he mentioned issues of prepaid meters, then it means that we have got more income to cushion us against issues that are unforeseen. One of the biggest problems at the moment, as mentioned, is low collection by the utilities. So if we increase the collection efficiency, then we have more financing to the sector. Reduced non-revenue water, which is also a big source of loss of finance, and also smart technology and smart systems. All these go to decrease waste and losses, and therefore ensure that there is more financing for the utilities to use to respond to any issues that may arise, and also to undertake development programs and projects. Public-private collaboration, I think I have already alluded to that. We need to work together. The private sector needs to work with together with the public sector so that we can direct more resources to the sector to ensure service delivery for everyone when required. So the challenges and also the solutions for these challenges have been, for example, during the emergency period, that is where some of the biggest challenges lie. So you have, if it is about a partnership, there is an agreement that needs to be signed. There is funds that need to flow from the partner to our government and finally to the implementer. So we need to relook at how we can make this process a bit faster during emergency period so that there isn't lengthy delays when people are actually waiting for this service. The issue of contingency and disaster management, here I think all I want to mention is that we need to have enough reserves in our contingencies and also in disaster management funds so that we can be prepared when time comes. In terms of implementation, this ties somehow with the issues of the delays in agreements and funds flow, the procedures, the procurement process. So that is something, again, that we can see how it can be re-engineered so that without flouting any rules, we can make the procedures and the processes compliant with the emergency responses. Efficiency and compliance. When the implementers are doing the work on the ground, any inefficiencies or lack of compliance could take people backwards because then the project can be stopped. And we have seen even in our country, some things are stopped just because of issues of compliance. So to ensure that there is efficiency and to ensure that there is compliance so that there is no interruption in service delivery at a time like this. Maintenance of infrastructure and technology. This speaks to development. If we maintain our infrastructure well and our technology well, then when the time comes, then we do not have issues where we have projects that are not working, infrastructure that is not working, and then we almost have to start from scratch again. The chairman mentioned the issues of last mile connectivity. So we need to look at service levels. We need to try and make sure that as many people are connected to water and sanitation as nearer as to their homes as possible. Because what has happened is that then there is a lot of water tracking. We are still seeing ourselves financing distribution of pipelines because some people are just too far from the source. So we need to address also the issue of service levels and focus on last mile connectivity, which is also a focus for the Vision 2030. And I think this would be the final slide. So what the fund has done, especially, yes, thank you. What the Trust Fund has done, especially for the emergency response, we are financing 11 counties through the funding from our government, Danida, European Union, Sweden, and Finland support. And this one is really just helping them fulfill what needs to be done to mitigate against COVID, like the hand washing, water provision, PPEs, sensitizations, and so on. Then in another program funded by our government, we are going to be financing at least 74 utilities, basically counties across this country with water treatment chemicals to address some of the issues that the chairman WASPA raised. And this is going to happen soon, but like I mentioned, processes and procedures, sometimes they cause a little bit of delay. And then we are also planning to finance, if possible, all the counties that have encountered COVID-19, but at least an initial 35 counties for operational and recovery activities through World Bank support. So we hope that by the time this is done and a lot of other programs that are out there, both from public and private institutions, we will have helped our utilities and also other institutions in government to address the issues of COVID-19. So this is the end of my presentation. The rest are pictorials, which I don't think we need to go through at this time. The presentations can be shared later with our audience. So thank you very much. Thank you. That will be enough, Alex. We don't have to share anymore. So we still need to have Engineer Gakubia with us. Engineer Gakubia, have you joined us? Yes, I think I can see Engineer Gakubia. Engineer Gakubia, you are welcome. This is the CEO, Water Services Regulatory Board, and he'll be giving us a presentation on behalf of the institution on opportunities and challenges of regulation in the new normal. Welcome, Engineer Gakubia.
Hello.
Hello, Engineer.
Is it my turn now?
Yes, it is your turn.
Oh, thank you very much and good morning. Sorry, I had another meeting which I was trying to finalize, but I joined just around 20 minutes ago. I will give a few points with regard to the subject today, which is about sustainability in the water and sanitation services. I'm saying that because look at my points from a perspective of what we have learned. And I believe because this is a serious emergency, yes, but it is not the only emergency the sector has faced. The only thing is that this one, nobody saw it coming, and it looks like we are still struggling to find a way of how to manage it and perhaps even address it from a medical perspective. The water sector, as all of us know, and I can see all of us in the panel are practitioners in the sector, whether it is in the public or private sector, is characterized by a cycle of loss. We are always saying we have low investment, we have low revenues, we have low quality of service. We have underinvested in the sector for a long time. And I think this seems to hit hard those people who do not have services, especially the poor in the low-income areas. Why we do not focus our investments as to those priority areas is an open question. It's up to us to reflect and ask ourselves and give ourselves an answer. Because of that underinvestment, of course, the low quality continues. And because of that low quality, then even raising self-financing becomes a very big challenge. So we should be learning from this pandemic that when we are hit by something like this, it is those people who have no service are most vulnerable. And that is what we are seeing. So it is really not something that we should catch us by surprise. And when you are regulating, you want to regulate and make sure that you bring in the objectives of the sector, the policy objectives of the sector, in terms of equity, in terms of efficiency, and in terms of trying to make sure that water services are viable. And those are our focus. And that is why we have been focusing on performance and focusing on aspects within the neighboring environment that perhaps improves that performance. So we continue focusing on access. We continue focusing on efficiency in terms of water losses and all that, and raising revenue so that we can improve the underinvestment. We can improve the self-financing within the sector. But as we focus on access, our access is not to people who already have services, because that is really what we look at. If you look at how we plan, there is a disconnect between the plans and the priorities in the sector. Whenever we have these projects, it's like we talk about, for example, last mile, and also people who do not have as an afterthought. It was not initially in the plan, and we are basically caught up when we have these problems to deal with. So what we have seen ourselves is that if the sector is organized properly, if the water service provision is organized properly, in terms of accountable utilities, responsible entities for that water service provision, then those utilities are better cushioned because the response is faster if you are going through a utility. And within our low-income areas, especially if they are covered by a utility, because that is where the poor service and inequality and discrimination is, we are able to run faster. The only problem is sometimes we do not think about the sustainability of those initiatives which we actually put in place. So, and that is why when you have a COVID-19, then the poor state of the services in those areas exacerbates the disease risk and the burden in this case. So compliance with the regulatory framework by basically having a formalized water service provider gives... Sorry? Should I stop? Hello? So compliance with the regulatory framework gives the utility a competitive advantage. And whenever there is support, then data from the regulator, which the utility has presented, becomes the first point of focus when it comes to supporting utilities in terms of addressing these plans. So there is however, there is a strong rationale in this case for public financing, because a lot of that public financing should be directed towards these accountable entities so that we are able to follow up in terms of sustaining. We are already thinking in terms of post-COVID, in fact, because if you really want to ensure your business continuity and minimum interruption in this emergency, then you really have to focus on your own performance as a utility. You also have to focus on coordinated planning. When you are planning, where are you expanding access to? And the priority should be clear. It is in these vulnerable populations. And in those areas, I think the focus initially in terms of what you invest in and what you plan for is really not about, yes, there will be an affordability question, but I think it's not really useful to talk about affordability to people who do not have a service. I think it is under the human right to water. I think it is important to provide the service, but of course, as you provide the service, you'll see how then do you sustain it based on your own cost recovery strategies and all that. But you cannot focus in these areas on cost recovery when they do not have a service. So let's focus on expanding access to these people. And I'm sure we can have a stepwise approach in terms of affordability, which really is where you start from. When you look at the rural areas in terms of regulation, I think the focus in these areas is a lot about access, yes, and water resource protection, because you can address quality issues on an incremental basis, but you can only address from a position that you're actually making efforts to actually make sure that people have access, but of course with the necessary risk mitigating factors put in place. So and we are already working on this with utilities through the ministry program supported by the World Bank, the water services development program. And in principle, in this emergency, we are working on supporting all the water utilities, although I had a mention there of the initial 35. In principle, that program will be supporting all the water utilities as discussed with the ministry a few weeks back. So sustainable water services provided by regulated utilities will be very, very key in a public health emergency. And in this case, if it is a government, both county and local and national government, they have a key role to play in terms of reading that kind of perspective to be internalized by everybody who is working in this water and sanitation service space. So we therefore need to improve our public and self-financing for water services, because the persisting financing gap in the sector may actually grow very fast in terms of when you see how we are growing as a country. We are also requesting and imploring the counties to make sure that they delegate authority of service provision to utilities, accompanied of course by a duty to give account for results, because that is really the work of the owner, because there is a very important principle in improving water service management in terms of separating ownership and management. People in government are not very good in terms of operations. They are very good in policies and all that, but they are not very good in terms of operations. So we should leave operations to the professional and technical staff, but give them space to operate, let them monitor them in terms of objectives and targets. We would also like to have a continue formalizing service provision. We have already done it in all the urban areas, but we continue down to the rural areas to formalize that service provision so that we are able to account in the sector. Without an accountable entity, it's very difficult to give accountability for the sector in terms of what we are doing. the more the investments we are doing are not necessarily increasing access. So we may need to have a paradigm shift in terms of having the right mix of social connections to improve access. And we can actually have a range of technologies. We can have yard taps, we can have kiosks, because when you have in the low income areas where there's very dense populations, perhaps we may not be able to have connections, but we can have a public yard taps or even kiosks for those people to at least have access to water that is of the right quality, of the right standards, and all that. So this is basically a lot of what I've said. We are already working on it, and we really expect the water utilities have been very supportive in terms of what we are doing, but we still continue to insist that without coordinated planning, so that you are very, very sure where your service gaps are, and in that case, when you get investments or when you're looking to funders like the trust fund or any other partners, you are very clear where you want to put the money on. It might be difficult to even have a significant change within the sector. I would also like to ask, even the big investment programs that are coming, without a last mile aspect, they may not really help us much in terms of moving very fast towards access for those people who do not have services. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, CEO Engineer Gakubia. We appreciate your presentation. It is very clear. And one of the things that Engineer Gakubia has said is that without access, we cannot talk about affordability or even cost recovery, and also to remember issues of water resources management and last mile connectivity. So again, if you have questions for Engineer Gakubia, put them just type them to us in the chat section or the Q&A section, and we shall be able to address them at the end. Thank you so much, Engineer. So our next speaker will be the development partners, Elizabeth Mattioli from the Royal Danish Embassy, and also Anna Tufesson from the Embassy of Sweden. You are welcome to present. And please, for the rest of us, when you're not presenting, please mute your mic so that we don't have any interruptions in the session. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a delight to join you in this webinar where we are discussing pathways to sustainable water and sanitation provision. My name is Elizabeth Mattioli. I work with the Danish Embassy based here in Nairobi. And as Ruth has said, we will be co-presenting with a colleague from the Swedish Embassy who you'll meet shortly. And so today we'll be talking around the topic of development partner support in a COVID-adjusted world. And when we say world here, we mean the Kenyan context. So we will be sharing our perspective of how we see the new normal. And then we will also suggest what needs to happen. Then after that, we shall highlight what we think the role of development partners should be. And eventually we will share with you examples, very specific examples of what has been done and what can be done. Now, just to be clear, what we are presenting today has been put together by Sweden and Denmark. It doesn't encompass the broader development partners involved in the water sector. Now, even as I delve into this presentation, I realize a lot of what we have to say has already been covered by the previous speakers. Nevertheless, we shall present it as is. Possibly we could give a different angle, but otherwise it will just be an emphasis on what has already been said. So how do we view the new normal from the perspective of Sweden and Denmark? I think it has already been said by the previous speakers. Evidently, COVID has further accentuated the urgency of water, sanitation, and hygiene services. And for us, we are looking at the fact that SDG number 6 is no longer an abstract shared global ambition. It is now something that has become a local imperative, something that we must now do as of necessity. Now at every turning, water must be available if we are to successfully contain COVID, and now and into the future, other pandemics. So that's the first point that we have. And then the second point also is just to say that the very fact that up to now, we don't have a vaccine yet Scientists are already telling us that we may have to live with COVID for some time to come. And we may even have to expect resurgence of COVID. Furthermore, scientists are also telling us that it is predicted we shall be having even more deadlier pandemics in the near future. And what this means is that if we are going to live with COVID and if we are going to expect other pandemics, then we do not see that containment measures are about to be loosened, particularly in the case of COVID, least of all, the WASH type of measures. So from here on out, WASH has to be at the front and the center of development. And all we have to think about now is scaling up and nothing less. Now, if we are to think of scaling up, then we are looking at the question of investments. And I think that has been touched upon by previous speakers. For us, our recognition is that Kenya is now a lower middle income country, gradually slipping off the list of countries that are eligible for development and humanitarian assistance. And we saw that when we now realize we're in a phase where we have an emergency with COVID. The bulk of the offer that came forward was actually a loan, in the form of a loan, as opposed to grants, the normal grants that we are used to, as opposed to humanitarian assistance. And therefore, what this is telling us is that now Kenya has to look more inwardly. Kenya has to look towards domestic resource mobilization and or external debt. That's what it is. Then also looking at the question of business continuity, we recognize that without water, there can be no business continuity, not for a country with the WASH statistics like ours. This means that, we don't really see, as I said earlier, that the WASH measures will be relaxed, if indeed we intend to move towards economic recovery. So that is our fourth point in terms of how we see the normal. But I think to summarize that is just to say in general and simple terms, we have no option but to scale up and also to scale out WASH services. Then in terms of what needs to happen, as government actors, as a private sector, as civil society, and as development partners, I think first and foremost, we have to subscribe to the UN declared decade of action, which is just beginning. And that means for us that we need to accelerate efforts towards achieving this SDG 6. And that means we have to sustain investment in the water sector. And we are suggesting that we need to do it with a view to achieve this SDG way before 2030. So we are just saying that all SDGs are kind of equal, but others are more equal than others in these times that we are living in. Now, in the Kenyan context, this SDG needs to be approached particularly with a proper lens. And I think this has been alluded to by the previous speakers. For us, what this means is affordability and accessibility are key. It is a fact that has been reiterated here by previous speakers that the poor are underserved and they pay a much, much higher costs for water, not to mention the impediments they face in even accessing this water. Then it also means what we have said, again, what the previous speakers have said, the last mile type of connections. It is something we have done with electricity, and therefore it is something we must strive to do with water. And this includes focus on user interfaces, and this includes us looking at how to mobilize finances and how to target investments, particularly so that we can get public subsidies to those who are most in need. Thirdly, for us, and I think it has been spoken to by MD Mangeli spoke about this, and I think also Engineer Kakubia has touched on that. It's the whole question of the WSP business models, where we feel there needs to be a review and a streamlining of these models. They really need to be aligned to the realities of populations in low-income areas, vis-a-vis the right to clean and adequate water. And I think that's a point we don't need to emphasize. It has been spoken to by previous speakers. Now, finally, as we speak about supplying water, it is very important that we also don't forget to equally invest in restoration and conservation of ecosystems, particularly water catchments and sources, or else we are saying that at the end of the day, we may not have water to speak about. So I'll leave it here and hand it over to Anna from there. Anna, over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, Anna, we can hear you.
Okay, you were supposed to see me as well for a little while. I don't know if you do, but
we can also see you. Thank you.
Yes, no, I'll stop my video because my connection is not very good. So thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Water Sector Trust Fund, for organizing this. I'll continue where Elizabeth has stopped. Just complementing, on the last slide on what needs to happen, and concurring with previous speakers, of course, also continued work on water use efficiency, water demand management, going green and low carbon in general in the water sector. And last but not least on that slide, of course, good governance and zero tolerance and fighting all kinds of corruption in the sector. Okay, and now how development partners can help. Sweden and Denmark maintain support to Kenya's water sector since many years, primarily working with mandated institutions to fulfill their roles as duty bearers and help strengthen the roles of consumers and civil society as right holders. And we have opted to work with and through the Water Sector Trust Fund since its inception 15 years ago for partnerships now with the county governments and the WSPs for efficiency and accountability. In the spirit of SDG 17, we foster partnerships that will enable sharing of knowledge, expertise, and technology that would support realization of SDG 6 in Kenya. And examples include Denmark's Strategic Sector Cooperation Program and Danish business instruments. Obviously, we need to collaborate to use scarce and even becoming even scarcer development cooperation resources even more catalytically in the future. And next slide. So what has been and can be done by development partners in water sanitation in response to the pandemic? Again, development partners continue to coordinate through the Development Partners Group on Water and Sanitation, linked to both the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation and the Council of Governors. And now the National COVID Response Cluster Group on WASH. All development partners are indeed alerted on the situation and the needs and respond in line with their profiles and abilities. Here are a few words on what Sweden and Denmark in particular have done. Sweden, overall, we have had no additional funding for Kenya for COVID response. In our water and sanitation portfolio, all our agreement partners have been invited and encouraged to adapt their ongoing programs to the current situation and restrictions, including, for example, no-cost extensions of programs. Some agreement partners have reallocated existing program budgets towards specific COVID response activities, for example, under the J6P program of the Water Sector Trust Fund, jointly funded with Finland, as has already been mentioned, and also the Kenya Water and the Sanitation Network, EWASNet, running their water governance support program. We've also recently contributed an additional approximately 180 million Kenya shillings to UNICEF's WASH response to COVID, with a focus on low-income areas in Nairobi and Nakuru. As to our future plans, Sweden will have a new cooperation strategy with Kenya for 2021 to 2025, And hopefully our embassy here will get a mandate under the heading Environment and Climate to continue to invest catalytically in water and sanitation, sustainably benefiting people living in poverty, complementing Kenya's own initiatives, of course. So briefly hand back to Denmark to finish off. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. I think the last point is just also to say that Denmark's new bilateral program, which we expect to start in 2021, has a very explicit support towards water and sanitation, and mentioned under the headline of how we continue to address COVID. And the other thing that is also happening in the background is that Denmark recognizes that COVID has now underscored the importance of inclusion, social cohesion, and internationalism. And therefore, we look to a time of showing more solidarity with Africa. And there's a whole conversation going on, which has been led by Denmark on building back better and greener. Last week, we had a meeting, a roundtable, where Denmark managed to bring all the Nordic ministers and heads of various multilateral institutions, and where our minister is championing this whole course of showing solidarity with Africa and working with Africa towards building back better and greener. And of course, we foresee that water will be something that they would be interested in, although no commitments for now. Thank you very much, Anna, for that opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Elizabeth and Anna. We appreciate your presentation in place of development partners. Now, from that presentation, we have been able to hear an emphasis on what has been discussed in previous presentations, but also a new discussion on innovative financing so that the subsidies and the grants go to those who are the most vulnerable. And this has already been mentioned in terms of sustainable financing through affordable credit and co-funding. So co-funding can also be done together with the implementing organizations. You also mentioned going green. So we need to go green so that we can sustain both the environment and the services, and also knowledge sharing. This is, even the forum we have now is knowledge sharing, and it's good to have this knowledge sharing with our various development partners because they have experiences from different countries. So also looking forward in terms of development programs, we have new country strategies for both Sweden and Denmark. And maybe if just to mention quickly that for Denmark, the Water Sector Trust Fund is already going to be benefiting in this strategy because we have a program that we are already formulating that will also go towards supporting water and sanitation in Kenya. So thank you so much. Questions for our development partners, please remember to type them. So in the program, our next presentation on behalf of the county government is the chairman for the caucus of the CCs on water, forestry, and mining, Honorable Engineer Festus Ngeno. So Engineer Festus, this is your time. You're welcome.
Thank you, Ruth. I hope I am clear.
Yes, you are.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for organizing this webinar session.
You're welcome.
For me, I will be looking at the opportunities and challenges, and of course, as presented in ensuring the service delivery, either in the present norm or in the new normal. And I want to appreciate the earlier presenters, WASPA, the WASREP, and of course, yourselves, and of course, the development partners that have made their presentations. So from the COG perspective, and I'm looking at it in a global sense, and quite a number of issues that are, and of course, those that I will be raising. And of course, one of the key things I will be touching on at some point is the effect on climate change on COVID response and mitigation. And quite a number of us have mentioned on the same. So on the onset, and I'm happy that the CAS, Dr. Timori is on board from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, and of course, I presume Engineer Chengo. So I'll start off on the challenges. And one of the key things that came up upon ourselves on the onset especially, and I think even WASPA has articulated the same, was on the issues of protocols that were issued. So I'll start off by asking ourselves, I think we need to define the place of the WASH sector within the Ministry of Water and Sanitation in the delivery of water and sanitation services. What came upon ourselves as county governments, and of course, as we were looking at the protocol, the protocols that were issued, was, I think, the lack of clear policies, institutional frameworks to guide the sector on what, how we were supposed to respond on the WASH. Noting that one of the things that came upon ourselves was that the frontline fighting of the COVID pandemic was the issue of provision of water and sanitation services, for that matter, for purposes of unwashing facilities, and of course, extension to the underserved or the low-income areas. So one of the key things that came upon ourselves was that WASH was very loud from the health sector, and the WASH from the water sector was somehow diminished at some point. And I think on the earlier sessions we had in the month of April, with the various of us who are already on the panel and even the development partners, we were asking ourselves that I think the frontline communication would have been from the where we understand ourselves, from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation. But you would always hear that the WASH particularly was very loud from the health sector. And even as the protocols were coming in terms of fighting COVID-19 spread, the protocols, yes, were being said and they were issued, but again, the public participation on the same, and I think it became a big challenge to us. And I think the utilities have articulated well, because when protocols were issued in terms of provision of free water for unwashing, extension of services on the unserved areas, within and no resources accompanying them, was a big challenge. And of course, as utilities were making their presentation, you realize that quite a number of them are really have been hit by COVID pandemic, because they have utilized their resources, which were meant for minor investments within their budgets, for example, in order to provide the services that were then that to call provision of free. But again, from where we sit from the county governments, when we were providing the services for unwashing facilities, or even for, yes, in terms of, because one of the key things we've been told from the health perspective is that keep on washing the hands, sanitize, and of course, social distancing and all that other things. But you will find that as you provide those services to the low-income areas, the underserved areas or unserved areas, which were not even have been served, especially from the rural perspective, then the people from the ground or the beneficiaries were requiring water for other uses. Unwashing was not even the critical aspect. They needed that water for drinking purposes. And therefore, the lack of water resources, again, water scarcity within our country played a critical role. So even as we were training the water service providers to provide services to the low-income areas, to the unserved areas, one of the key things we did not think, we did not bring on board as ourselves, as the policymakers, was where was this water coming from? The WASPA articulated very well the issues of transportation or tracking of water to using water pausers to the end users, especially the low-income areas. But you see that water is still coming from their sources, which is already strained in terms of coverage. And the regulator has already pointed out the issue of low coverage within our area of service. And therefore, then one of the key things that came to our mind is how then were we supposed to look at this support in terms of, from the perspective of the ministry, in terms of infrastructure, resources that were supposed to accompany the measures and the protocols that were being issued for purposes of us containing the spread of the pandemic. And therefore then it calls upon us in terms of consultation and coordination, and especially in the WASH sector, especially from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation and Health, and of course the Council of Governors, because the impediment on the implementation of the same was the fact that we were not looking at the sustainability aspect of it and the resources that were supposed to accompany the implementation. And therefore, that has really had a lot of impact on the provision of water and sanitation services. As we speak now, we are talking about 6 months into the pandemic. And of course, most unwashing points were supported or were provided for. But the question we could ask now is that are those facilities still sustainable? Are they still working as we speak? Are the utilities still managing? Remember, even on the analysis that were coming in the month of May, April from the utilities was the downward trend in terms of their revenue collection, especially when communication came to the effect that disconnection should not happen in terms of the provision of water and sanitation services, hence affecting our sustainability effect. And of course, we have had this discussion, and I'm looking forward to looking at the results coming out in the impact from the regulator, looking at how the utilities have been able to really make changes in terms of how their business models are supposed to go forward in terms of response to the pandemic. And critical to mention is the role of the intergovernmental relations. And of course, this is basically between the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, the Council of Governors. And I would point out at this particular point that this pandemic within the water sector, we've talked about since Water Act 2002-2016, our Supreme Water Law, was that good corporate governance was tested in this pandemic. And of course, you realize, even as we were looking at the analysis of the WSP's response, whether in provision on the urban setting or on the rural, and that the governance within the sector was really one of the key things that was really defining the moment for the utilities to either survive or perish for that matter. And even as we were looking at the response from our side on the county government allocation of resources, you would find, and this is still defining what I was earlier mentioning, that the resources which were being allocated at that point, we were focusing on the health perspective, either the PPEs, the wash sector from the health perspective, and forgetting the support from the real soldiers on the ground, which are the WSPs in terms of fighting the pandemic. And therefore, then the resources that were supposed to come on board as a challenge were taking long time ago. And I think that has been articulated on the presentation from the WSTM. One of the key things we were expecting from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation on the onset was the support, for example, in terms of provision of water treatment chemicals, which I presume up to date, 6 months down the line, that has never happened. And we hope that will be sorted out soon. So the bureaucracies within the systems, again, hampers our response on, even as we were looking at our budgeting within the county governments. But again, as I mentioned, more emphasis was being put in the health perspective. And even as we speak, 6 months down the line, even the discussion within ourselves, we are still looking at it from the health perspective. Are the doctors being paid? Are the PPEs being supplied? No one is really focusing on that long-term solution in terms of provision of water and sanitation services. And again, urban sector were hit. And of course, the rural sector, again, were affected because that is where the pandemic is going to now into, especially in the county government. And therefore, then, as we look at that, I think one of the key things I would add, and we had this discussion with the development partners, was again the coordination on the same. And we had this candid discussion with the WASH development partners, and I think at some point we were really lost in between. When, for example, provision of chlorine or water treatment chemicals were being provided for by some development partners. So we were wondering, were they going to the formal WSPs within the county governments, or were they going to the health sector, the Department of Health, for purposes of fumigation and sanitization? No. So it became really a big challenge in how that was supposed to be coordinated. But I presume then our communication was clear in terms of how the coordination was supposed to happen. And then again, in the one last challenge before I go to the opportunities, is on the effects of climate change. And I think it was all myriad of dynamics and problems that came into being. Looking at the flooding that came at the point of when we was working hard to provide the water and sanitation services, especially through our WSPs and of course from the rural perspective. And again, looking at the wash regulation, the rural wash regulations, which I presume we are supposed to have inherently adopted within the county governments. But again, on that aspect of climate change, we have not been able to really, as a country, been able to really conceptualize the effect on the same in our provision of water and sanitation services. And I would be able to highlight in my opportunities what I presume would be the critical thing that we need to look at. Going to opportunities then on the new normal is one of the key things I would add, and I'm happy the CS again is on board, is the implementation of the intergovernmental relations between the various levels of government, the Council of Governors, the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, who are the parent ministry. And I think, again, calling upon the quick support from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, I presume, and I think the WSPs ourselves as county governments, and we have had these discussions all through for the last 6 months, I thought there has been really, really minimal support coming out from the parent ministry to the fight against pandemic, especially from the county government's perspective. And even as we were looking at the performance-based grants, which we hoping that it will benefit all the WSPs, we still are a long way to go in terms of our prerequisites and programs that we need to put in place, because we need to respond as fast as possible. 2 is the place of wash sector in the sector. I think it needs to be redefined, and I think this is a good opportunity for us, the wash practitioners, to understand our wash from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation sector, and also the role of wash from the health sector. And I think we really need to define the synergies from the same. And I will give you an example, and I think that this is so critical. The UNICEF plays a critical role on the same. I saw the USAID are playing a critical role on the same World Bank again from the health perspective. But again, the connection within the same from the health perspective, the wash sector perspective from the Ministry of Water and Sanitation, as we understand, has been lacking. So I would urge the top leadership of the ministry to be able to coordinate with their colleagues in the health, so that we can be able to read from the same page. We have Water and Sanitation Law Act 2016, and we have the Public Health Act again on the other end. Are the two communicating to each other in terms of wash response and in terms of response to emergencies like this? Then on the development partners perspective, I would urge that there will be proper coordination and synergies in the support of the wash activities of maximum impact. One of the key things as we look at the SDG call number 6.2, which is a progressive realization of human rights to water, is the fact that we need to really be able to look at the sustainability aspect of it. The role of ourselves in terms of this provision is so critical, and looking at the water law, we have to be faithful to the letter and spirit on the implementation of the Water Act 2016, which of course gives us an opportunity at Article 43 in terms of our rights to water and what effects we are supposed to then maintain in terms of our role as a government. And the resources, again, opportunity to expand water and sanitation, it gave us that opportunity. I know we pushed quite a number of our utilities, even though governance was tested. So even as the utilities expanded to the rural areas beyond their service area, of course, with support from quite a number of ourselves from the county governments, the question will be, after the pandemic is being maintained or contained and the curve is flattened and everything is back to the new normal, are those services that were expanded going to be sustainable, especially if the resources, which is the water resources, and I'm happy that the development has mentioned the issue of us looking at the catchment on the same, will that be sustained and maintained so that we don't have this issue that we pumped in a lot of resources in the wash sector during the COVID-19 pandemic, but there's nothing to show 2 years down the line that the utilities were back to their normal operational in terms of the numbers. They were looking at the numbers of service people that they are affecting in Kenya, or they are serving in Kenya. Will that continue rising, or will the curve come down again? So I think that is so critical from where we sit as county government. And lastly, on the climate change effects, I think this is so critical, and I would like to address it in a summarized perspective, because this thing has really taught us, especially from the county government's perspective and policymakers, and I would want to raise it especially from the WASH perspective, that we take this into consideration even as we look at our programs going forward. That as Kenya works to address the current COVID-19 crisis, I presume integrating the green and resilience elements into its COVID-19, either recovery or post-COVID plans, is so critical. And at all levels, there is need for us to take a broad view of resilience and recognize that communities are aware and they should experience in managing multiple risks simultaneously. We need to support the communities to adapt to changing climate during this COVID-19 pandemic by adopting an integrated multi-asset risk management. This risk came and we were not prepared, we were hit, and we're still grappling on how we need to respond. And therefore, the latest climate science should be able to inform us on how we need to respond, especially from the locally led initiative from the communities. And this is looking at the rural perspective, the rural sustenance of the provision of water and sanitation. And the institutions are recovering from the pandemic emergency, while we need to be very ready to prepare for future in terms of how we need to prepare for future pandemics that can come on our way. COVID-19, for example, can be an important entry point, and we need to allow ourselves, and this is coming in the backdrop of the rural water guidelines that we passed some few months ago, in preparation for the changes in other sectors in the environment, that climate change may bring, in addition to many other potential impacts, a positive impact within the community if we are able to look at our sector from that perspective. And we also need to understand the following, that assets reveal existing social inequalities. So even as we were providing water to the low-income areas, to the unserved, if we are going to talk about sustainability again in the terms of WASH, post-COVID-19, we need to understand and address the pre-existing social. We have issues on political and economic factors that contribute to the vulnerability of the poor and marginalized in the first place. So as we provide this service, which is so critical for us, are we able to provide that service in a sustainable manner? Because if you look at the factories of how the effect has really affected the poor, the low income, the unserved areas, it is so devastating. We need to know that the poor and marginalized have rights also, and people are more affected by the impacts of climate change, and they can also be adversely affected by actions and policies that mitigate and adapt to climate change. And this is captured in our water law. For example, we need to understand how greening, and for purposes of sustainability, use of solar energy can be able to give us an opportunity to be able to bring in the livelihood resilience programs within our water sector provision, and even as we look at our sanitation. Our recovery from the pandemic should pay special attention to empowering the most marginalized groups. My prayer and urge to the water sector professionals listening to me is that I'm hoping that at the end of the day, as we come out of this pandemic, that the people that were not served before can continue to be served and empowered, and especially looking at how countries, how ourselves should be able to see the rise in the cases in terms of increasing our water connectivity, the last mile connectivity, as mentioned by the presenters that was in earlier presentations. And therefore, then, in addition to protecting our communities, which we are serving, from our perspective, as we look at the urban populations, we also look at the rural. And of course, when you combine the counties, we form the Kenya. So our role as a government is to provide water and sanitation services to all the 47 million Kenyans. Communities need to be engaged as valuable partners to develop solutions.
Engineer, you can wind up in the next 1 minute if that's okay.
I'm summarizing. I'm in my last point.
Thank you.
We need to provide issues and looking at the climate solutions to addressing climate change. We look at the youth, look at the women empowerment programs in the water sector, and this crisis should be able to give us that opportunity to connect the social vulnerability, the equality that we've been able to see, and the conflict sensitivity that needed for us to be able to systematically integrate the WASH policies, the systems, the procedures, and the government's role within the two levels, especially from the national and the county government perspective. And therefore, as I summarize, is to say that as we look at the opportunities, this presents us an opportunity to be able to look in all our programming, the water resources strategy that needs to come within the climate change mitigation, action, and also adaptation within the various sectors. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Engineer Festus, for that elaborate and quite clear presentation or talking notes. We think that we have learned a lot now in terms of the activities at the county government working together with the national government. From that presentation, you have articulated the opportunities very well, especially how the resources have now been expanded also to the utilities to be able to meet the need for water and sanitation, and to focus again on the role of the ministries of health and water in responding to this crisis, which has really turned out to be not just a health crisis, but really a water and sanitation crisis. And you also mentioned that it turned out that people needed water, not just for washing hands, but also for drinking. And therefore, a lot is being done at the moment to make sure that people have got water, not just for hand washing, but also for using in their homes in response to this pandemic. They need to wash, they need to cook well. So thank you so much, Engineer. We need to move on now to our next presenter, and remember to send in your questions for Engineer Festus, if you have any. Yeah, so the next speaker, speaking for the Ministry of Water and Sanitation and Irrigation, Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation, is Engineer Kimandi Chengo. Engineer Chengo will be talking on the role of national government creating an enabling environment. He's the Deputy Director in the Water Services Department. So Engineer Chengo, you're most welcome. And when you are done with your presentation, kindly introduce to us the chief guest so that he can make the keynote remarks. You're welcome, Engineer.
Thank you very much. And I'm happy to join the webinar, the discussion. I want to appreciate the conversation that has gone before and appreciate what the panelists have been able to articulate as far as we, together as WASH sector, try to address the pandemic. I'll give you a quick overview of what the role of the national government is in the next slide, just about 5 points. That as expected, the national government is supposed to give the policy direction in any situation like this pandemic. And this comes in the form of guidelines, general guidelines and specific WASH guidelines. And this gives the national position as a government of a country, of Kenya, and any advisory that comes about. And this has come up, it triggers all the way from the national government through the ministry, as far as WASH issues are concerned, to the various institutions, to the various stakeholders, and also to the citizens of Kenya. As a national government, we also expected to articulate and disseminate any legislative decisions that come about to inform or those that have an impact on the WASH sector. As a government, we also expected to promote the guidance on the safe management of drinking water, sanitation services, and also water resources management. These are both international, regional, and national guidance or guidelines. As a ministry, we are expected to promote that and to engage our stakeholders as far as those are concerned. At this under this mandate, communication will be key to ensure that we articulate well what we are supposed to do, that the stakeholders are able to fully understand, we get their goodwill, and also convince them that they will be able to take up their roles and responsibilities as far as those guidelines and decisions are concerned. The second key role of the government is in strategy development. The national government is expected to take charge of any emergency, and for that it should be able to develop some strategies to manage the emergency. So this will have to be done through articulating how the pandemic should be able to be sorted out, to be managed, and also to engage the citizens to be part of the solution. Because again, as a government alone, they cannot be able to sort out the issues by their own. The other strategy that the government has to ensure is in place is the aspect of continuity of operations. That the usage of the public water and sanitation services continues for the overall well-being of the public. And key to this, in this scenario of the COVID-19 pandemic, the issue of wash in healthcare settings is critical in the informal settlements and other hotspots. And this has been very well articulated by the previous speakers. So the national government has to have a position, it has to have a strategy, it has to identify activities that needs to be taken up to ensure that wash in those hotspots, in those vulnerable areas is put in place. And of course, not to forget about sanitation. The issue of safely managing wastewater and fecal sludge has to be addressed. It has to be discussed. We have to look at which are the stakeholders that are part of this process and how best can this be managed under this kind of a scenario. The next slide. The key, and this has come out very strongly under the COG and the WAS representation and even partners, is the issue of coordinating the plans, the strategies, and the various activities. And under this scenario, the ministry is expected to link with the other relevant ministries, the COG, the partners and stakeholders, international agencies, and all other stakeholders that have an impact or are part of the solution in the water sector. So the link has to be the national government, it has to be the Ministry for wash aspects. Like I mentioned again, the citizen engagement has to be there. They need to understand fully the situation as it is, what is being done, what are the solutions, and particularly the roles and responsibilities of the citizens so that they can be able to uptake. And so another component is the information management during the pandemic. The national government has to collect the status. It has to be able to analyze and also disseminate so that all players are fully aware of the status. And in this case, the case of wash situation in Kenya, what is being done, what are the interventions, where are the gaps? This is the role of the national government to be able to articulate all that process. Key to this discussion about coordination is the engagement of the private sector. And we appreciate that in the wash sector, they play a key role, not to the scale that the sector would like to be, but it's very important that the private sector is engaged to support the government initiatives so that we have more efficient, resilient, and robust plans and strategies in place for service provision. They have to take their role and space. And this, the national government has to spearhead. And of course, expected that the national government will spearhead the resource mobilization to intervene, not only in addressing the needs during the pandemic, but also to look at sustaining the provision of service, and also to be part of the national investment plan that is always ongoing. So the national government has resource from the government coffers. It has to look at support from partners, mainstream partners, the non-state actors, and other stakeholders, including the private sector, to be able to fill in the financial needs that the sector requires. Like has been mentioned during the discussion, the national government promotes and continues to encourage utilization of internally generated funds to intervene in addressing the needs during this scenario. The discussion about revisiting the budget allocation to address the topical needs due to the pandemic is a role the government can be able to play to engage the National Assembly, the Treasury, to be able to allow reallocation of budgets to support the interventions that are required. And of course, as part of this discussion, the national government should be able to look at how best they can fast track the implementation of ongoing projects that will be able to provide more water resources, more water services, be able to improve the water resources management inputs, and also address sanitation needs. Because the more people, the more water we have, the more people we bring into the water services and sanitation bracket, the better for us is to address the pandemic implication. And that also is related to the investment role, responsibility that the national government has. It has to support continuously the implementation of the water supply and sanitation infrastructure development. And the key focus for us has been, like has been mentioned, is to try to support extension of services to the informal settlements in our towns, in the underserved, which is mainly taken up by the Sector Trust Fund, and also in the rural areas. And there's been a bit of budget reallocation to support those hotspots. Again, we have to look at other sources to secure or provide finances for sustained management. And here I'm looking at support that is going to the water service providers, to the service providers in the rural areas, for them to be able to continuously provide services and be able to recover. And one example is what was articulated by the CEO WASREB, the negotiation with the World Bank to be able to support directly the water service providers to be able to sustain their service provision. And this, the ministry and the national government is fully supporting this kind of initiative to ensure that our water service providers can be cushioned during this time. And that's related to the last point under investment, so that we have an emergency plan that supports continuity of service delivery. And this, the national government will invest, will look for resources and be able to support the implementation of those services. Last but not least, one of the key responsibilities for the national government is the monitoring evaluation or the implementation of the interventions during this pandemic. Should be able to evaluate, we should be able to learn lessons from that, and then redesign our actions, redefine the activities that we need to undertake as a sector, and engage the stakeholders to be able to, for the uptake of that process. This pandemic has also informing us that there's need to reimagine our waste management business processes that are ongoing and seek better ways to operate. We have lessons we are learning about how we are managing our business, all the way from water resources management, water services provision, sanitation services provision, hygiene promotion. We have to reimagine, relook at those elements and see where the gaps, redefine what we need to do. And subsequently then develop a recovery strategy as a national government. How do we recover from what has gone on as we think about now post-COVID intervention? In the process, again, we have to review the use of our technology going forward. Not only technology, also how the stakeholders are taking up their roles and responsibilities. How is the private sector participating? How can it improve our businesses? How we provide businesses? So this will give us a chance, and we start to think about it, to review the technology and the role of the other players. And of course, we as we go forward, we are identifying some of the gaps in the way we run our business, the way the sector is managed, the way the sector is planned. And there will be need to relook at the old water resources management and water sanitation and services rules and regulations to be able, one, to learn from the lessons and fill in the gaps that have been identified. Two, to strengthen what has been existing and possibly then purge out any obsolete rules and regulations that are there in the sector. So those are the key areas I wanted to share with yourselves, and it articulates the general roles and responsibility of the national government, and what are some of the issues that we are looking at the national government as we face this situation the way it is. Thank you very much, and with that, it's my humble pleasure to invite the chief guest, Dr. Adwa Tumui, to give his remarks. Dr. Tumui, please welcome.
Thank you so much, Engineer Chengo. I hope you can all hear me.
Yes, we can. Okay.
Thank you so much for bringing out the role of the national government in all this. You've done it very well. Let me also thank all the panelists and the presenters for this important meeting, and especially the Water Trust Fund and the partners that have brought this meeting, which is very key at this point in time. So really, from the ministry, let me give apologies of the cabinet secretary, who was supposed to be the chief guest, but nevertheless, I will take the role. So really, I'm really happy to preside over this important and innovative event as we grapple with the effects of the global COVID-19 pandemic. And Kenya, and indeed the entire global community, is undergoing the COVID pandemic, which has so far infected over 25 million persons and killed more than 850,000 by the end of last month. The government, of course, in keeping with the World Health Organization guidelines, has put and implemented measures to contain the virus, the most effective of which have proved to be hand washing with soap, use of sanitizers, social distancing, wearing of masks, and providing adequate personal protection equipment to health workers and other frontline responders. Earlier on, from the outset of this pandemic, the Cabinet Secretary of the Ministry of Water, Sanitation and Irrigation directed water and sanitation sector institutions to ensure a number of issues are done. One among them was all public water points in towns and city centers to be functioning for effective hand washing, installation of adequate hand washing facilities in cities, towns, slums, and market centers, and provision of water tanks in strategic locations and points supervised to avoid wastage during hand washing. And indeed, we hand washing machine facilities, we've done already about 5,700, about 6,800 water tanks, a couple of boreholes, especially in Nairobi. The other thing, of course, is mapping high densely populated areas to ensure adequate water supply and hand washing facilities, uninterrupted water supply, including rehabilitation of non-functioning boreholes, adequate water supply for hospitals, health facilities, and dispensaries, and supply of water tanks to rural areas without adequate water supply to be filled with safe water, even through water tracking for effective hand washing. Of course, the other thing is regular feedback to the ministry on challenges during this implementation of these measures. And in keeping with this directive, the ministry and its institutions, working together with county governments and other institutions, embarked on provision of water and hand washing facilities with water utilities ensuring uninterrupted water supply. Huge amounts of resources have gone into this initiative with great support from our development partners, particularly Danida, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and the World Bank, and of course the European Union, among others. The private sector and non-governmental organizations have also been at the heart of providing support, as evidenced from the sector COVID-19 coordination cluster reports. Our counties, together with the water utilities, have incurred great expenses in ensuring adequate water and sanitation for all at this time. This has come as a cost to our utilities, whose resources have been depleted and revenue collection has gone down significantly. I had Ngeno say the ministry has not provided any support. We actually requested for 600 million shillings from the Treasury. We already got 200 million shillings, which will be used for water, for chemicals, which unfortunately, because of the lengthy process of procurement, it took so long, but these chemicals will be available in the middle of this month. Going forward, development projects need to be fast-tracked to mitigate not just against current circumstances, but as a disaster management strategy for other unforeseeable circumstances. Our key agenda is to ensure water and sanitation for all by the year 2030. And of course, our constitution gives water and sanitation as a human right for all Kenyans. So in order to effectively deliver on this goal, utilities need to recover positively from the current pandemic and operate on sound business models and have access to financial and other resources. I greatly appreciate the presence of the private sector in this forum. Commercial banks have been instrumental in increased access to finance by advancing credit to our utilities through the result-based financing program implemented through the Water Sector Trust Fund. Private financing will become more and more important to service provision as our utilities mature into commercial business models and are able to access more credit. The ministry, of course, through the Water Sector Trust Fund is commencing their own lending, which when blended with commercial finance from our banks will provide affordable credit to the water service providers. This is key for post-COVID-19 recovery strategy. Suppliers, of course, play a key role in supporting modernization of technology, advancing credit facilities, and enabling timely maintenance and repairs. The good relationship between the utilities and our suppliers, like Davis and Shatleaf, has built a positive collaboration with an impact on service delivery. The non-governmental organizations working in the sector are our development partners in every sense of the word and have availed much resource to service provision while strengthening the capacity and community participation in development. The ministry will continue to support any initiative done within existing laws which aims to boost service delivery and propel the country forward within the Vision 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals and our medium-term plans. Initiatives that encourage public-private collaboration are especially critical to sustainability as they help us harness the unique strengths of our various institutions. This is what we need for post-COVID-19 recovery strategy. I'd like to urge our key stakeholders to think of the role they can play within the institutional strategies to help the country bounce back and extend even further in ensuring adequate water and sanitation, of course, through vibrant institutions. On our part, as a ministry, we will continue to develop and implement policies that create an enabling environment for collaboration. We can refocus, for example, our corporate social responsibility programs towards recovery and sustainability efforts. For our development partners, we are in this journey together, and I'm confident we shall continue to work together for the mutual benefit of our citizens and global communities. The national and county governments' collaboration should be especially enhanced, and we've done this when we were doing the washing facilities and the water tanks. We worked very closely with the county governments, and this time to provide necessary support to the water service providers who are institutions of mutual interest and crucial to the health and well-being of Kenyans. Sector institutions such as the Water Sector Trust Fund, WASREP, Water Works Development Agencies, among other institutions, shall continue to engage and support the utilities through resource provision, capacity development, and adherence to set standards. This will include reduction of non-revenue water, which has been one of the major challenges in sustainable service delivery. The ministry will pay great focus on programs that promote sound business models, systems, use of modern smart technology, stakeholder collaboration and coordination, community engagement, and ultimately programs with positive impact in reaching our set goals. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, we are working on the sanitation policy through APHRC and other stakeholders. And of course, I realize that we have the policy within the health ministry, and we need to actually find a way of harmonizing this, and we hope this will do that. I know one of the presenters has mentioned that the ministry was not so much in the public as far as water is concerned, but a lot has been done by the Ministry of Water. It's only unfortunate that this may not have come to the public. And of course, without water, I don't know where this pandemic would really be. So let me continue to thank all of you, especially our development partners. And I'm confident that this signals a new milestone in addressing the challenges facing the sector in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is going to be with us, we don't know for how long, and we really need to be prepared for any future pandemics. We've always advocated for the One Health approach between the Ministry of Health and the veterinary department, because most of these diseases come from zoonotic, they come from animals, and that One Health approach will really help to curb some of these diseases. So with those few remarks, let me say, let's continue well with this webinar, and at the end of the day, we will come up with solutions and way forward that will really help us as we manage this COVID and ultimately the post-COVID strategy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, our chief guest. We are very happy to have you here, and we have listened. And I think we can all agree that the chief guest's remarks tie in together a lot of things that have already been said and that we are all trying to address, and also assuring every sector that the ministry is doing something and that the ministry is working with all the stakeholders in the water and sanitation sector. So we shall continue, and I'm going to hand over now to Wario Bonaya from Kenya Markets Trust, so he can not only give his presentation, but also moderate the remaining sessions. Just to request all our panelists and participants to stay with us a bit longer. We know that we had indicated that the session goes up to 12. We only have like 2 more presentations, and then we respond to questions. So please just be patient and stay with us until we finalize this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Thank you very much to all panelists, and thank you to our chief guest. I'll just show my face briefly before I go to my presentation. I'm Abdi Wario. I work with Kenya Market Trust. Kenya Market Trust is a local not-for-profit organization driving sustainable change in 3 sectors of the economies in Kenya, that is livestock, agricultural inputs, and water. For this particular presentation, I was given the mandate to make a brief presentation on the kind of partnership that is required between policymakers and stakeholders for sustainable water services. And therefore, I'll delve into that particular presentation. To start us off, what I will do, I'll just show a scenario. Next slide, please. This is a scenario. We've been operating in a calm waters for very long, since many, many years. And COVID-19 has presented us with a unique challenge that we need to handle. And as you can see, the unique challenge is that we have a scenario that in the next 1 or 2 years, we don't know how COVID will evolve. However, the organization that will survive, the sector that will survive, are those sectors that will adapt accordingly to these scenarios. And we know quite well, even within the ocean, there are those guys who are quite happy whenever they see waves coming because they will do quite well. And this scenario of having turbulence will remain with us for a while. And therefore, we are called upon as a sector to think critically on how then do we adjust. And the previous panelists have really talked to this component, and I don't want to get too much into this. Next. Of course, as has been mentioned by the other panelists, COVID-19 has really impacted the water sector quite a lot. And the impact is largely felt in low-income areas. The impact is largely felt also among the industries. The impact is also felt in utilities that have been serving huge industries, because industries have either slowed down or closed down, and that has really impacted their revenue. However, it has also presented a unique opportunities for us as a sector practitioners and policymakers to rethink of how we've been providing water services. And we have an opportunity either to continue with business as usual or to shift the dialogue and come up with a paradigm that will address water service delivery in the context that we've been provided by COVID-19. Next. In that regard, we then need to ask ourselves, why partnership? And a number of panelists have talked to this particular component in different ways. And unless we have the right partnership in this particular environment, we will continue doing the same thing over and over, and yet expecting that we will deliver amazing results. Unless we question the kind of partnership that we've been having between the private sector, non-governmental organization, the government, and civil society, we may find ourselves in the same scenario. And therefore, the reason for the partnership is to have effective and efficient response to pandemic. And this has clearly been demonstrated. To avoid moral hazard as a result of investment in one entity. And we have seen, for instance, in a scenario whereby different players continues to invest in one entity at expense of others. And that is clearly demonstrated there isn't sufficient coordination among players. To drive innovation and ingenuity in recovery phase, COVID-19 has presented us with a challenge, yes, but also it has presented us with a lot of opportunities. It is upon the sector practitioners now to pick these opportunities and come with innovation. How do we reach out to our consumers? How do we utilize the various technology? How do we structure our policy dialogue so that we can have effective engagement between different players? The other component is to reduce overlap and duplication. As you are all aware, our sector has got many players who tend to have more or less similar function. But once we have appropriate partnership, we will be able to reduce that duplication. And the other component is to enhance better knowledge management, and this kind of platform is tend to fill within the larger puzzle. We need to share more knowledge. There's new knowledge coming up in different contexts, and therefore the reason of having better partnership is to ensure that we have better learning and knowledge management. Lastly, and I think this has been mentioned by all presenters, and Engineer Chengo really emphasis on this, is to foster sector resilience. Assuming that in the next 1 year we have another pandemic such as COVID, and we have not adopted accordingly to the scenario that has been created by COVID-19, it means that our sectors will not be resilient. And therefore, this is the reason why we need the partnership. Next. In terms of what sort of partnership we require in new normal, as previous panelists have said, this scenario will remain with us for a while, and therefore it calls for a new paradigm. One of the things that we require is to have enhanced policy dialogue among different stakeholders. And the ministry and Engineer Festus has also mentioned this, that we need new set of regulation, new set of thinking that will guide us. And this can only be attained if all the key stakeholders within the industry are able to put their heads together to come up with a policy that is quite friendly to all the players. The other component which has been mentioned by Engineer Gakubia is around better coordination among all stakeholders. Remember, we've said we've seen a scenario whereby we have moral hazard in terms of overinvestment in one entity, and that is clearly demonstrates lack of better coordination. But if we have a well-coordinated sector that knows what every player within the sector is doing, we'll be able to get value for our money in terms of the investment that we are making in the sector. The other point is around intergovernmental framework. I think as a sector practitioners, we've been discussing this for long, and COVID should have provided us with an opportunity actually to operationalize the intergovernmental framework so that there is a harmonious working relationship between national and county government, non-governmental organization can contribute to this discourse, and it might be useful then to fast track this component of intergovernmental framework. The other component is what other colleagues have mentioned around regulations in terms of dialogue. We've said, are we actually ready for the new paradigm? We need to discuss the new business model. We've done a lot of studies around consolidation. Is this an opportunity for us to consider consolidation as the model that will take Kenyan water sector out of slug performance? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. Is the current business model addressing the challenges? Is the model able to take us to the next level? Lastly is the issue of joint initiative, such as joint implementation, reporting and monitoring, so that we don't have different reporting mechanism. Lastly, next slide, please. In order to realize recovery in the new normal, a new partnership framework anchored on coordinated approach among all stakeholders is needed. And we cannot overemphasize this particular component. And I would like to end my presentation with a phrase from J.F. Kennedy that says, in a crisis, maybe you can go back, in a crisis, let us be aware of danger, but also recognize the opportunities. And COVID-19, as much as it has created scenarios that we are not familiar with, it has also created a lot of opportunities. And therefore, it is upon us as a sector practitioners, from policymakers, from implementers, to ask ourselves, what business model do we need to put in place? If the existing business model has not served us adequately, do we need to go back to the drawing board and consider models such as consolidation, and consider models such as public-private partnership, so that we can take this sector to the next level? Thank you very much. Allow me to invite my next speaker, who is MD Davis and Shatcliffe, Mas Waweru. We were supposed to have Polycarp Igade, Group Chief Commercial Officer from Equity Bank, but he has sent his apologies. He was not able to join. So at this juncture, allow me to invite Dr. Mas Waweru. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, all of us. Welcome to this presentation titled Sustaining Effective Engagement with Utilities in the New Normal. As you've heard, my name is Dr. Mas Waweru from Davis and Shatcliffe. I start off this presentation with a quote, which says, and I quote, "To give real service, you must earn something which cannot be bought or measured with money. And that is sincerity and integrity." This is according to Douglas Adams. And indeed, in all relationships, it is paramount that these two core elements exist. Let's move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. In order to create a sustainable and effective engagement, it is important that the two parties in question communicate to understand the core concerns of each party. Utilities' key concerns are timely delivery of value for money for supplies or functional infrastructure. On the other hand, the supplier's concerns hinge on timely payments. The process followed to actualize the two parties' key concerns for mutual fulfillment determines the effectiveness of such an engagement. Developing the partnership, it is important that water utilities identify their core suppliers, professionals, contractors, for their respective requirements. The concept being that such organizations are engaged from planning, designing, to execution, thereby enabling the water utilities to maximize the benefits that accrue from such engagements. For example, water utilities would easily benefit from the deep commercial and technical advice based on the long industry experience of their partners. Such partnerships are bound to ensure timely delivery of jobs or projects. I would like now to touch on a few salient areas where we identify gaps in effective partnerships, this being on policy, technology, and payment, which I'll expound on the next slide. Please go back to the previous slide. Back to the previous slide, please. Thank you. The concept of this webinar was on reviving the economy. From a supplier perspective, the question to pose is, what is the impact of COVID-19 on the economy? The C-19 pandemic compounded an already difficult economy for a wide range of suppliers through pending bills. According to the Treasury CS, by 23rd December 2019, the national government, ministries, departments, and state corporations owed suppliers 89 billion shillings, the pending bills, out of which 58% was validated for payments. This has resulted in broken engagements with institutions, frustration of several contractors and suppliers, with some shunning government work. These are situations where sincerity and integrity have been let down. In a difficult economic situation, it is even more critical that water utilities reconsider their approach to partnerships, and decisions made are focused on risk reduction, wise investment to realize sustainable service delivery. Such a move would call for review of policy, technology adoption, and guaranteeing payments for suppliers. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. In acknowledging the pending bills dilemma, the Public Procurement and Disposal Amendment Bill 2020 is in Parliament, which seeks to have the government institutions pay suppliers and contractors through bank guarantees. In the event of failure to pay the certified works on time, the suppliers present the bank guarantees to the bank for settlement. This, according to suppliers, is a welcome move, and utilities need now to reconsider their stand on advance payment against bank guarantees of equivalent amounts. Effective engagements would also be built around framework contracts, or MOUs, binding parties together for specific agreed assignments. And this would come in handy in times of emergencies, because you are ready to turn around quite quickly to the MOUs for support from suppliers. Therefore, they would ease responsiveness and timely provision of services when and where required. In realizing good engagements, it is important that conditions of contract are fair, feasible, and achievable, rather than being skewed against suppliers, as is the current situation. A case in point is where the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act 2015 specifies liquidated damages for delayed work and payment of interest for delayed payments. But the practical situation is that the former is charged onto the contractor, but the latter is not paid. Such situations lack core ingredients for effective partnerships. From a technological angle, and this has been cited by a number of speakers before me, there are many areas that utilities can leverage on from such partnerships to address the current and future situations. These include adopting of Solar Grid Connect to provide power for water supplies in a cost-effective manner. Adopting of remote meter reading where premises access may not be necessary. Adoption of remote monitoring apps like the iDaylive, which indicate equipment operational status, sending messages onto your phone while the equipment is many kilometers away. Others are adoption of product selection apps like the DNS Flow and the solar design app like the Solar Calc done by Davies and Shatcliffe. In addition, opportunities abound for office water billing and remote payments, basically asking water utilities to think about cashless transactions, payments through bank transfers, mobile money, credit and debit card payments, and finally, full adoption of the IFMIS platform, which we as suppliers consider that this has not been fully and well exploited and used for the purposes of our partnerships. The crown on the icing of the relationship would then be that suppliers get guaranteed payments. Let's move to the next slide, please. The next slide. Let us review a few case studies demonstrating sustainable, effective engagements with the utilities during and pre-COVID-19 period. In this picture, we see Lowasco, which is Lamu Water, projects in Kiunga and Kizingitini, where solarization was done to provide each of the water supplies 66 kilowatts of solar power. This project was partly financed by WSPF, among other projects in Lamu. And these are complete and fully paid for. We move to the next slide. The next slide, please. This is an engagement with Busia County. This picture shows an engagement with Busia County where there was a requirement to provide 132 kilowatts of solar power for their Mundika water supply, which is now complete and fully paid for. As you will note in the chart, there's a lot of data that is provided that is able to be read remotely on this particular water supply. The solar pumping is done during the day, and in the night, KPLC power comes into play. We move to the next slide, please. This is another partnership with Rift Valley Waterworks Development Agency, where the contract involved supply and equipping of solar pumping solutions in 4 counties. The boreholes were drilled separately, contracted to professional drillers, as the case should be, and Davies and Shatcliffe was called upon to do the electromechanical works. We move to the next slide. In conclusion, we summarize that sustainable, effective partnerships need to be mutually beneficial partnerships that are not skewed against either party. Sustainable energy adoption will address the ever-concerning electricity bills in water utilities. Adoption of technology that is available, which of course has a high capital cost, but no maintenance costs, in the long run will be a better solution and better utilization of the funds available from the utilities. Adopting specialist framework contracts or MOUs for work expediency and economies of scale will be a welcome move for water utilities. Moving towards conclusion, we would say guaranteed supplier payments for ease and smooth relationships would provide a win-win solution for all parties and all will be happy. This would lead to sustaining effective engagements with the utilities in the new normal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mas, for that wonderful presentation, clearly indicating the need of having structured and mutual partnership between different players in the sector, and the need also to embrace technology in terms of addressing operational efficiencies. We've come to an end of our presentation. We will allow 5 questions, and then most of the other questions will be answered through the chat. I will try to ask 3 questions that have been posed by the attendees, by the participant, and then my colleague Ruth from WSDF will also pose 2 questions. The first question is directed to Engineer Gakubia on the last mile connectivity. The question is, what lesson can we learn from Kenya Power in terms of enhancing last mile connectivity. The attendee or the participant note that it has created large infrastructure that has added costs that cannot be recovered from the income. That is number one. So as water sector, what can we learn? And that is directed to Engineer Gakobia. The second question is still directed to Engineer Gakobia. The issue of poor access and affordability of quality water in rural area has been discussed quite a lot. What systems and governance mechanisms are in place to incentivize urban WSPs to extend services to rural areas? The last question is what I was trying to jot down, but I see Engineer Ngeno has responded to it, but I will still pose the question. And this question is both directed to the Ministry of Water and also county government. What has made the implementation of the intergovernmental coordination for the water sector almost impossible or difficult? And the attendee conclude the question by asking, which other sectors have done quite well in terms of improving intergovernmental coordination? Thank you. We can start with Engineer Gakobia.
Thank you very much. Water is a basic human right. You cannot survive without water. So it's a bit, but what we can learn from the last mile of power is that came about because of very, very, very heavy subsidies from public finance in terms of extending power. Why can't we have those kind of public finance systems to finance last mile connectivity for water on a service that is a basic human need? It is clearly articulated as a right. In fact, if you want to really move towards really actualizing your human dignity status, you really have to have a proper water and sanitation service. And public finance plays a very key role in that. So it cannot be that we can get very heavy subsidies for power and not very heavy subsidies for water. I'm not saying we do not have public finance in water, but I think we need to align that planning, align that whatever budgets we have with the plans we make. Are the plans we make directed at meeting the basic need first as we move towards other needs and other things? And that does not in any way say that water, putting in structures or making sure water is always available is not necessary. It is, but there should be a balance that as we provide or we continue protecting water and even giving, putting artificial structures to improve reliability, we must make sure that water is also serving people. We are also serving people who are really, really in need. That way, these kind of emergencies will find us in a well-prepared mood. Even before we ask for assistance, we at least know what we need to target in a public health emergency like this. Second question, the answer is very simple. The guidelines are there. They really answer those questions about access and affordability and how we move towards making sure that we actually reach and attain those two items in a sustainable way. The rural water models are very clear in terms of the context in our country, and they are kind of, I think they are basically about 4 models which you can use depending on the context within the rural areas and all that. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Gakobia. The last question can be handled first by Engineer Ngeno, and then I will hand it over to Engineer Chengo or our chief guest to answer that question.
Thank you, Rio, for the question on intergovernmental framework. But before I make that response, just to appreciate the presentation by the MD Kenya Davis and Dr. Mas Waweru on the last slide on sustainability of energy. And I think, as was mentioned on the onset, as we negotiate with the Ministry of Energy in terms of preferential tariffs for the water sector, I think one of the key things that we need to look at is the green energy. And as an example from Nakuru, and I think Daktari, you are aware about this, and we are working with your branch very closely, is that for me, of course, for my boss, the governor, he told me that he's not going to commission any projects that are not solar powered. especially boreholes. And therefore, then it gives us an opportunity. It answers the question of Engineer Kakupia in terms of rural water supply. We are lucky in Nakuru that we have a rural water supply. So as we look at the expansion, last mile connectivity within the rural water setup, and developing sustainable water projects, it is possible then to really manage the expansion in the rural water space. So I wanted to just comment that, and of course, technology is so important for us in that respect. On the intergovernmental framework, I think this is something we've discussed with the Ministry Engineer. We walked through this part with the Engineer Chengo from the Ministry, and I think the document is well done. And I would just mention that as I responded on the chat, I think the onus now is between the top leadership of the Ministry. That is now the CAS is here. To just take up the mantle with the PS and the CS also in the Ministry, and of course meet the Council of Governors COG chair and the COG chair also in charge of Water Committee to just coordinate and make sure that is implemented. So when that document is well then defined, it gives us an opportunity for us to engage. So I would just say it is about the open governance and the political will to take up and implement what is the right thing in terms of what is the role of county government is water and sanitation service provision, what is the role of national government in the same. And I think that is what I would just urge, that we just take up the mantle. Otherwise, we will skip on mentioning this. I know quite a number of development partners have really been focusing on what is the state. And I just responded. I work closely with the Agriculture Department in terms of other programs, especially on the climate change financing through the World Bank, which is locally led. And I see the relationship between the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, and the Council of Governors Department of Agriculture is so smooth. The roles are well defined. The framework is working. There is clear programs that how who is supposed to do what in terms of their provision in their roles, and therefore I thought we needed to adopt it and implement it. That is the only way we can be able to really manage ourselves. And of course, it gives us an opportunity, even at this pandemic, as mentioned by Wario, that the intergovernmental framework coordination mechanism would have given us an edge in terms of how we need to respond to the pandemic and the crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Festus. Engineer Chengo, our chief guest, any response to that?
Thank you, Wario. I think Ngeno has said it, but in addition, that framework also gives a framework for data collection, public reporting, and this was the question that was asked in the chat. That framework also articulates how data will be collected, who will provide the data, how it will be analyzed, and how we report to the public as far as watch data is concerned, in addition to what is existing now, including WARIS and WASREB, RIMS and water resources management. But that framework will also try to address the aspects of data and information within the sector. Thank you very much. Back to you, Wario.
Thank you very much. Let me hand it over to Ruth to pose two more questions before we go to way forward. Ruth, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Wario. And our participants, we must appreciate you. There is very vibrant discussions going on the chat. And thank you, our panelists, for responding to the previous questions. So I would want to pose a few questions also to the panel. Wario, if that's okay, it might be more than two, probably three. The first question to WASPA, which was asked by Chris Shimba. And the question is, Chairman, with the reduced operational costs, is this going to compromise provision of water and sanitation? Yeah, given that we have to do a lot of things to reduce operational costs at this time, is that affecting the service delivery? So that question will be answered by Chairman Mangeli. The next question from Tony Achila. how are all the stakeholders involved, how are they investing in the latest technology in WASH? So we've talked a lot about technology. So how are we ensuring that we are investing in the latest technology in WASH? If the development partners can probably contribute to this in terms of financing, Anna and Elizabeth, and I would also request Davis and Shatliff to respond to this also, Dr. Waweru, in terms of actual technology. How are you ensuring the latest technology? And I think you alluded to that a bit in your presentation. The other question was to the Water Sector Trust Fund, how we ensure that there is no diversion of funds that we give to the implementing partners. So we shall respond to that. And if you just allow me, sorry, to extend this, there was a question on water safety planning software for WASREB and probably also for the ministry. So how are we utilizing this software in response to this crisis, the water safety planning software? So if we could probably start with the chairman, WASPA, and then we move on in the order of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Let me respond to that question. The reduction in operation costs will not affect. The answer is no, will not affect the service delivery. Remember, we are working on the guidelines that have been issued by the regulator. What we only emphasize to our members was that at least we minimize expenses as much as possible so that we can remain afloat during the period of COVID. That none way does not mean that we are going to compromise on the service delivery. And that's clear to all of us. We'll make sure at least the service delivery will continue as usual. We only try to minimize expenses that we felt at least we can survive without them during this period of COVID. And that's what we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Mangeli. Anna, Elizabeth. The next question, whoever is ready, even if it's Dr. Waweru, the question of the latest technology in WASH.
Thank you for the question. As I've indicated in my presentation, there's a lot of technology that is available, and actually much of it can be obtained and you can actually, it communicates onto your phone. And for example, the iDeliv, we recently had a case at Sasumua Water Supply in Naivasha, and the pump there is a big pump that is installed but has not been operating consistently because of unstable power supply. And when a site meeting was called, one of our engineers in Naivasha just went onto the site with his phone. And basically there was a lot of argument because KPLC was saying the power is stable, the power is good. But using the iDeliv technology, a readout was sent out of all the failures that had happened in the last 2 months. And it was very, very clear that it was unstable power supply that was coming in. And this is a technology that is available, it's operational, it's working, and we are readily available to make a communique on the same, or even make formal training for the same, because it is something that can be retrofitted onto existing water supplies. Indeed, a number of our customers who have borehole supplies, they get messages on their phones when the pump have stopped, when it has started, or when it has a problem. And that is technology that can actually be used quite easily. The other one is the DNS Flow, which is a product selection app. And again, you can get that from the App Store. You just download it. It's called D&S Flow, and that you download onto your phone, and it has a complete product selection and design app which can be used across the market. In terms of solarization, solarization helps to address the ever-challenging issue of bills, electricity bills on water supplies. And we have worked out and seen that the repayment period of the investment normally is between 4 to 7 years, during which the bill that you use to pay for your water supply, you invest that, the bill for about 4 to 7 years, you are able to recover your investment. And after that, you have 20 or so years of free electricity. And that is technology that is readily available. I've shown you practical sites which this has been invested. And the benefit of that is that there's basically no maintenance. So it is a technology that is there. It is available. We can retrofit onto any water supply. You just need to advise what the capacity of the system is. We'll provide the support, and we are able to deliver. On a different note, and I would like to really commend you, the organizers, for this event, in the fact that you have eventually been able to loop in all the necessary stakeholders. In the pandemic, during the pandemic, just when it broke out, the Kenya Water Industry Association had a lot of challenges to get their teams to move across the country. And I must commend Engineer Akubia, who was quite fast in listening to us and was able to incorporate us. When some of these policies are being made, declaring that the water sector is an emergency, is an essential service, surely you cannot forget your suppliers who provide you the services. Because I'm aware quite a number of drillers have been involved in doing the Nairobi boreholes and all across the country during the COVID time. So it is essential that when these policies are being created, all stakeholders are called in so that we are able to support each other. Thank you very much. I hope I've answered the question, Ruth.
Yes, Dr. Waweru, thank you. That was very well answered from a technological point of view. Elizabeth or Anna, are you with us?
I'm here, Ruth. I can give in a few, just a quick response to that. Yes. I just want to say that besides the bilateral program that we have here in Kenya, Denmark has a number of other instruments where we avail technology and expertise and knowledge through various means. For example, now we have a whole initiative we call Strategic Sector Cooperation. This cooperation actually twins like institutions in Denmark and in Kenya, where we try to see how best we can actually share the resources we have and the expertise that we have through this kind of initiative. We also have, the Trade Council within under our umbrella, which really tries to bring in private sector actors who have got, technologies that can be applied here in Kenya, but of course on a commercial basis. And we have others which are actually more of grants with a bit of requiring a bit of co-funding from the private sector. Like we have one that is called Danida Market Partnerships. That is also another instrument that we use. And through these instruments, we really are trying to see how best we can avail technology, Danish technology here in Kenya. So we have one project at least that has been off the ground for quite a while by Grundfos. It's called the Grundfos LifeLink project. That's one example of how we have availed technology. But I'll leave it also to Anna maybe to add what they're doing in Sweden. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, just very briefly. Yes, just as Denmark, we do have a Swedish Trade Council that arranges various partnership building events. There are also a number of, I think, mainly global challenge funds for companies, and not just Swedish companies, to introduce and test out new technologies. And I know a number of grants have been coming to Kenya. Kenyan companies have been quite active. Also, in general, I think it's also to make sure how the procurements are being done, how we can innovate and have like impact contracting, not looking so much at technical standards and the technical requirements, but look more at the functionality and the results we want to achieve, and their new technologies will stand a better chance. Also, to actually look more at the operation and maintenance phase and the costs involved when we choose technologies here and now. So, but there is a lot of work to be done and many opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Elizabeth. So I will now respond to the question on how the funds, how we ensure the funds, the trust fund, are not diverted. And then I will make a small comment on the investing in technology before I hand over to Engineer Chengo and Engineer Akubia to respond on the software. Now, for the Water Sector Trust Fund, really, it's all about the systems and the mechanisms that we have put in place for financing. And I think the Chairman WASPA and also Engineer Festus Ngeno and all the others who have worked with us can confirm that we have systems in place that really mitigate against the risk of diversion of funds. If and when it happens, it is rare and we are able to capture that very quickly and take the necessary measures. So for the process of the trust fund, we really have very little fear in terms of diversion of funds. On the issue of investing in the latest technology, if we can speak in terms of funding, and I think Engineer Chengo, you can add to this when we are responding to the other question, there are a lot of programs right now which are designed towards making sure that our implementers are investing in the latest technology, especially green technology and also climate proofing. Basically, also some of the programs that we are doing, even that are financed through the resort-based financing, are even geared towards modernizing infrastructure so that we can reduce even on issues of non-revenue water. So it is a financing issue, but it is also a technological issue. So I will hand over to Engineer Gakubia and Engineer Chengo to respond on the water safety planning software. And maybe also one more comment on the investing in technology for Engineer Chengo from the ministry's perspective. Thank you.
With regard to water safety planning, the regulator has issued guidelines on water safety planning. The regulator is not prescriptive to the extent that he says this is how you do it. It is up to the water utilities to look into the market and see what technology is available. We cannot really order the use of any technology, but we appreciate that technology is really one aspect we can leverage on to improve our performance, to improve our services to the people. So the water safety planning guidelines were released last year. So it is up now to the users to see whatever ways they would want to do it. As I always say, technology is one thing, but it is always important that before technology comes in, you really understand what you want to get out of that technology. And that's basically the reason we do not prescribe. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer. Engineer Chengo.
Thank you very much. I think it's well articulated. But from the policy position, it's really that we appreciate that as we move forward to increase our efficiencies, to improve our business processes, the way we manage affairs, technology has to come in. We have to finance that technology, but that has also to come with the concurrent with the infrastructure development. So we appreciate, again, technology will play a big role as we move forward. Thank you. Back to you, Ruth.
Thank you so much, Engineer Chengo. Now, we are nearing the end of our webinar. So I am going to invite Engineer Festus, who has just one comment on the sanitation policy. Engineer, please keep it brief. When we are done with that, Engineer Chengo, please invite our chief guest so he can make the closing remarks for this webinar and also officially close for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thanks for the opportunity. I just wanted to make a comment on policy, and of course, Engineer Chengo is coming on board and the CAS is here. One of the key things that I saw a comment from, I think one of the participants really asking why we need to have another sanitation policy from the water industry or water sector, and we are already having one from the health sector. And from my perspective, I think one of the key approaches which I really tend to agree with this comment, is that we need to approach the sanitation program in a holistic manner. We are presenters on the issues of sanitation from Nakuru in terms of the county investment program, county inclusive sanitation strategy, whereby both the water and the health dockets are involved in the sanitation strategy. So I would also recommend, and I presume, of course, the regulator is on board on the same, and the ministry was in charge of the implementation and financing of the same through the World Bank, is that we are on the last mile in terms of developing a tool that could be able to assess the sanitation investment programming within the entire sector, either from the urban or from the rural. So even as we look at the sanitation policy from the water sector, I tend to think that we need to borrow heavily from the health sector, so that as we talk about WASH from the water sector, we are also incoherent as we look at the WASH from the health sector. I needed to comment that I don't think we need to have several policies then. We just need to intermarry, look at the connection between the two sectors, because water and health are related. And therefore, I would concur with the sentiment from the present, or from the one of the participants saying that we don't need to really start again reinventing the wheel while we have a public health and sanitation policy and act that is already working in place. We need just to see how we need to fix the few balls and nuts within the water sector, and we have the ball rolling. And of course, Jengo having been participating on the same should be able to comment, and of course the CS who is on board also. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you very much, Engineer Ngeno. I think the comments on the sanitation policy development are taken on board. But what I would like to clarify is that we have the environmental sanitation and hygiene policy, that is the Ministry of Health. What we're working on as a ministry is the sanitation management policy that will look at the full chain. We'll be looking at complementing each of those policies. And it's not only environmental health policy that is affected. We have at least other 5 policies that have implication on sanitation. So we are looking at where we'll have the gaps and then take care of the full chain. We'll engage all partners and stakeholders in this discussion, so to ensure that all views and comments and opinions are taken on board as we move to this discussion. And with that, it's my pleasure now again to invite Dr. Twimul for final comments and closure of the webinar. Dr. Twimul, please.
Thank you so much, Engineer Chikengo. I think all of us agree that this has been a very important meeting and timely at this time when we're going through all this COVID-19. And I think from all the presenters, both from the ministry and the private sector, the partners, it's really come out that we really need to work together. We really need to put our heads together and see how we can improve, particularly on issues of sanitation, which you know very well is still very low, as a very low coverage in the country. So we need to work together to see that we improve on all the areas that we need to do. I've noted the sentiments on the sanitation policy. We don't really want to reinvent the wheel, but we just want to see how we can really, you know, as Kengo put it, have something that can wholly look at the sanitation space. We've also noted the other comments on the intergovernmental relations, which we are working on, and we hope this will be sorted very soon. Incidentally, when I was in the Ministry of Agriculture, I'm the one who spearheaded the intergovernmental relations that is working very well there. We hope this can be done in water. Having said that, I think we really need the support. Although people are saying we're middle income, low middle income country, we really still need a lot of support from our partners, particularly in terms of sanitation, so that we improve the coverage. So with those few remarks, let me thank all of you for participating in this webinar, and ask you to stay safe, wear your masks, keep your distance, and of course, so that we see whether the new normal will become another normal. So thank you very much. On behalf of the ministry, let me thank all of you and bring this meeting to a closure. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you.